January 14th, 1966. A Moscow hospital. The most successful engineer in the history of spaceflight is dying on an operating table, and the surgeons trying to save him can't get a breathing tube past his jaw. Not because of anything happening in that room, because of something that happened to that jaw 28 years earlier in a Soviet labor camp and was never allowed to heal correctly. 2 days later, a newspaper prints his name for the first time in his adult life. This is the story of Sergei Korolev, the man who built the Soviet Union's entire early space program from inside a state secret so total that even the cosmonauts who trusted him with their lives didn't know who he was. Korolev was already an accomplished rocket engineer in 1938 when the Great Purge came for him. He was arrested by the NKVD on June 27th on charges built from confessions extracted under torture from his own colleagues. One denunciation came from Andrei Kostikov, who took over leadership of Korolev's research institute the moment the arrests cleared it out. Another came from a fellow engineer named Valentin Glushko, a betrayal Korolev never forgot, and the two men would go on to run parallel, often hostile, tracks of the Soviet space program for the rest of their careers without ever fully making peace. Korolev was tortured at Lubyanka prison until he confessed to charges that weren't true. Then he was shipped to a forced labor gold mining camp in Kolyma, one of the deadliest corners of the entire Gulag system, where cold, starvation, and disease killed thousands of prisoners every month he was there. He lost most of his teeth to scurvy, and his jaw was injured. In a beating or an accident, the record doesn't cleanly specify, and it never healed the way it should have. After the Purge's chief architect, Nikolai Yezhov, fell from power himself, Korolev was retried in 1939 under Beria, and his sentence was reduced. A fellow prisoner, the aircraft designer Andrei Tupolev, managed to get him transferred in September 1940 into a sharashka, a prison design bureau where scientists and engineers kept working on state projects under guard for the government that had convicted them. Korolev was finally discharged on June 27, 1944, exactly 6 years to the day after his arrest. It would be another 13 years before the charges themselves were formally cleared in April 1957, just 6 months before the launch that would make him the most important engineer in the world. Because even after his rehabilitation, even as he rose to lead the Soviet Union's entire space effort, Korolev's name was kept out of public record. He was referred to only as the chief designer, a title, not a person. The Kremlin's stated reasoning was straightforward Cold War logic. A man this valuable was a target for assassination or for a defection attempt the state couldn't risk. Some of the cosmonauts who trained under him for years, who trusted him before every launch, genuinely did not know his real name. Working entirely under that anonymous title, Korolev's bureau produced a run of firsts that no other program in the world could match. Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite, in October 1957. Yuri Gagarin's flight aboard Vostok 1, the first human being in space, in April 1961. Alexei Leonov's spacewalk in March 1965, the first time a human being left a spacecraft in orbit. Deep space probes that reached the moon before anyone else's did. Every one of these was, to the outside world, simply the work of the chief designer, a phrase without a face attached to it. On January 5th, 1966, Korolev checked into a Moscow hospital for what was described as routine surgery, removing a bleeding polyp from his large intestine. Once surgeons were inside, they found something worse, a large tumor and heavy bleeding that hadn't been anticipated. The operation turned into an emergency. and when doctors moved to intubate him to keep him breathing, they ran into a problem nobody in that operating room had caused. Korolev's jaw, broken or injured in a Soviet prison camp 28 years earlier, had never set properly. It impeded the breathing tube at the exact moment he needed it most. He died on the table without regaining consciousness at the age of 59. 2 days later, Pravda ran his obituary, the first time in years that his actual name and photograph had appeared anywhere in public, attached at last to the title everyone already knew. He was buried in the Kremlin wall, on Red Square, with full state honors, as the man who had beaten the United States to nearly every meaningful milestone in the early space race. The same government that spent 2 decades hiding Sergei Korolev's identity to protect its most valuable engineer had years earlier been the one to break the body that eventually killed him. He never got to be famous while he was alive to notice it. He was only Sergei Korolev in the history books, for the first time really, in his own newspaper's obituary page.